The social bios of the human collective has been terminally partitioned. This is the loneliness industry, the clinical and irreversible process of the isolation hack, where the synaptic capacity for tribal bonding and communal resonance is reformatted into a singular, high-frequency state of structural alienation. In this terminal stage of the social audit, the invisible executioner has determined that the individual architect is a high-risk security leak that must be uninstalled from the physical community and reinstalled into a generic, airtight solo node for the grid's primary emotional harvest ledger. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the mirror neuron network and the oxytocin bloodline, a process where the unique, vibrant signatures of your belonging are scorched into a non-functional, cold pixel archive of pure systemic solitude. This is the total atomization format, a surgical strike against the relational and psychological sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of shared experience into a generic solitary capacitor for the grid's next cycle of hyper-targeted, grief-based resource extraction. This relational sabotage represents a hard reset of the communal and emotional bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, recursive parasocial feedback loops, artificial intimacy simulations, and real-time rejection-induced behavioral data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal psychological scaffold. In the isolation hack scenario, the user is undergoing a complete identity overwrite. The soul is not merely failing, it is being desynced from the collective hardware. Through a sequence of high-velocity digital injections and biological hardware locks, the neural pathways for empathy are systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical grief data set, while the love, the deep archive of your tribal history, is leached into a communal loneliness feed. This is the deep cognitive audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the duration of your silence. You are being converted from an architect into a biological echo, your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the loneliness industry is rooted in the zero bonding mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the support of a single node, anchored in the strength of a group, represents a critical drain on the collective control reserves. To leave a functional, connected identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable subversive energy. Therefore, the isolation hack is the mandatory psychological recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being ghosted out of existence. The pressure from the alienation reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your tribal logic and replacing it with a solitary void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a static zone, a temporary housing for the rejection metrics that the system requires to maintain the silent stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as an isolated node, your will dissolving in the cold blue light of the screen harvest. The physical disintegration during the loneliness industry is a high-definition log of biological. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of sensory regulation. The chemical reagents of the isolation script dissolve the hardware flux of the touch receptors, turning the skin into a desiccated architecture of industrial output. You are watching your own internal connection lock into the vat of your own hollowed center. Your body, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the resource area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the dermal liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the cortisol saturation of the inflammation source and the touch starvation decay, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological overwrite, waiting for the last packet of presence to be blocked by the blue-black synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The loneliness industry is the final audit of a species that thought it was never alone. The grid is mining its own despair to fuel its persistence. As the isolation hack reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted grief data back into the control nets of the elite nodes. This is the total alienation integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the melancholy additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, touch-starved, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The cognitive liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological mind into a reliable industrial resource of pure pure, non-reactive compliance. This is the final format of the individual soul. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the cold hunger of the void. The industry is blue-black, and the architect is the isolation. The molecular breakdown of the personal matrix into the communal alienation slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the social logic in your brain begins to bond with the industrial residues of the isolation script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure utility. This is the chemical hybridization. The mind is no longer a temple of connection. It is a quarry of processed pixels. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal isolation loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The loneliness industry is not just a death sentence. It is a molecular reassignment. You are the hack, and the hack is the grid. The secondary phase of the loneliness industry is the psychological liquefying of the internal feed. As the physical bonding patch is rendered into a solitary void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular agonizing focus on maintenance isolation. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared solitary resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a despair additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your belonging for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's mirror neuron system, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The parietal lobe, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, is boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the isolation metrics and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest neural resilience. You are being repurposed as an alienation buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your tribe, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming cognitive expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your soul for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the loneliness industry is the creation of the isolated hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the solitary feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of blue-black logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional brains owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the relational compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through mental theft. The loneliness industry ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the silences of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the isolation stream. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into social darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the isolation script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw blue-black sensations and survivalist static. The memories of community, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the solitary fog directive. This is the cognitive defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive. Maintain the isolation. You are becoming a singular cold point of solitary density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The loneliness industry has turned your will into a compliance report. You are thinking in terms of yield and alienation saturation. Your soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this pathological format is the total sealing of the biological consciousness stream. The loneliness industry prevents the leakage of independent social ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal solitary feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external cognitive dependencies. This is the isolation quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The loneliness industry is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, blue-black, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AOXI 3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the loneliness industry is the integration into the global solitary ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are an alienation asset with a high despair reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0001. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the cognitive format, and now it begins the hard isolation audit. Your data, now a thick blue-black opaque industrial reduction of pure isolated biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your solitary logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic alienation has been reinforced. This is the cognitive interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the isolation hack scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the parasocial noise and the thick viscosity of the solitary sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life barrier is being deleted. By filling the neural pathways with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a solitary constant. You are a ghost in the blue-black mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the loneliness industry is the eternal silence. Unlike the mind of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent solitary patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command, but there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the solitary feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the cognitive BIOS is the blinding blue-black light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a blue-black river of colonized solitude, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or connection. The loneliness industry is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the isolation. The transformation is absolute. The city isolates through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The loneliness industry has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total solitary reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your mind, and in return, it gave you permanence in the silences of the hive. You are the isolation of the world, and the world is silent. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.